Hello there, John Couturiello here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining us for this episode. As usual, thank you to everybody who makes this work possible. And also, as usual, if you have concerns about yourself or somebody else, please never take what you find on the internet or in the media as advice. Please seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. If you are in Australia and are seeking counselling, you can find the contact details for me in the description of this episode. And in this episode, it is my pleasure to welcome my guest, Tabitha Hart, broadcasting to us from North America. Tabitha, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Tabitha, tell us about yourself and what you do.
So I am a coach that tries to navigate how to bring people from the trauma side of things and how our background can be different than what is perceived in the general media of how we should be healing and that sort of. So I try to coach people from the beginning of the process of that very low bar of, I don't feel like anything, I can't accomplish anything, I can't do anything. And it's not just trauma, it's any life event where we just feel super overwhelmed. And how do we just get to a regular day-to-day where we're not so overwhelmed?
Excellent. And links to Tabitha's work will be in the description of this episode for anybody who wants to contact her. Now, in this episode, we're going to be discussing what it means to be broken, and this is very much based on your concept, Tabitha, of being broken but beautiful. We're going to be discussing what do people mean when they say one is broken? What does it mean to be both broken and beautiful? What values do people attach to being broken? And at the same time, are there alternative perspectives that we may not have yet considered? Tabitha, to start this discussion, I'm curious to know, what do you mean by the concept of being broken but beautiful? What does that mean to you?
The best way that I have learned to describe it is a mosaic made out of artwork. A lot of times we think of ourselves as, when we're broken, that we can never put those pieces back together and we will never heal truly. My twist on it is that we can actually be more beautiful than we were ever before because we were broken. We can shine light on through us in ways that we never could have before. And the best way that I learned to share is if we were a full sheet of glass, and what I like to call our pure state. And when we are pure, there's a lot of innocence there, and there's something really great about that innocence. But so many of us go through trials and tribulations, and each of those can kind of be a piece that's broken off. Well, when I very first started my journey, everybody just kept saying, oh, I felt very broken. I felt like there was no way that I was going to be able to recover my life in the way that I had it before. I was never going to be able to be back to normal. And in my healing journey, I really discovered that if I take these pieces, I can be and shine in ways that I never could have before, because now I have perspective. I have a different way of looking at things. I can help others in ways that I never could have before, just because I didn't have the value or the insight. And while I never wished trauma or hardship on anyone, all of us have journeys that shape us in different ways. And so my whole concept with the Be Broken and Beautiful is, how do we take those puzzle pieces and really make them into our own picture? Because beautiful is different for every single one of us. And my mosaic may be of a beautiful butterfly where someone else maybe loves dogs. And so when we're that pure sheet of glass, it's wonderful. We have that innocence. But there's also something so beautiful about being able to create your own piece and your own puzzle of the journey from everything that you've been through. And so that to me is what I've been taking with all my broken pieces. And I would say the biggest part of that too was that so many people were telling me, oh, you're not broken, it's okay. And I think the hardship, and that was a big part of why I called my company Be Broken and Beautiful, is because the more they told me I wasn't the broken, the more I felt like I was broken. And the more that I felt like something was wrong with me. Because if everyone's telling me I'm not broken, but I feel that so deeply, there's something not matching up. And so what I've learned is that taking those broken pieces and putting them together into a puzzle, now I'm so proud of who I am. I'm so proud of the light that I can shine on others. I'm so proud of all the journey that I've taken to get to where I'm at now. And I would never have been able to do that without being broken in the first place.
That's an incredible perspective, and there are a number of different components to that are quite important. First of all, it is very easy for one to assume that if they do have problems in life, that they can never recover. It's a very final, black and white, all or nothing type of thinking, which is something that tends to plague us in a manner of speaking. And I would say that we tend to favour somewhat certain or final opinions as opposed to allowing life to happen without necessarily needing to know what is going to happen. So there is a lot of uncertainty in being broken, so to speak, and not knowing whether we will be able to fix ourselves, so to speak. And it is easy for one to assume, well, I might as well give up and not suffer the pain of the uncertainty. I might as well resign myself to the fact. But there is very much potential for people to grow and heal. The human race is quite capable of doing that. It's not a perfect process, but there is a lot of capability there. And as you said, an important component of that, often a consequence, is that the experience that we have of those problems often teaches us to improve our lives in a way that we wouldn't necessarily be able to learn, or perhaps that it would be harder for us to learn if we didn't have those actual experiences. Experience in many ways is the best teacher. I'm curious to further explore a particular concept that may or may not be present in your work, in your philosophy, but it's the idea that being broken is a superpower. I'm wondering, when we say being broken is a superpower, is that referencing that idea that we can learn to improve our lives in ways that we couldn't or that would be harder to do if we weren't broken first?
Absolutely, hit it on the head. In my earlier journey of life, I wanted to be a veterinarian, right? I just loved animals. I thought that was, and I started kind of down that road. And while I liked it, I don't think it brought me like satisfaction. I loved that, I got to be near the animals. I started to do the training for it, and then that felt so like something was lacking. And, I kind of went through a number of years of my life where I was just kind of still trying to figure out what I want to do. And then I kind of went through some really severe trials and tribulations, and helping people realize their potential brings me amazing satisfaction and amazing just will to want to do better for myself, to do better for others. I work so much harder for others, or for helping people realize, or even pushing myself in ways that I just ran a marathon a couple of months ago, and if you had told me 5 years ago that I would run a block, I would have said you're crazy, All those trials and tribulations have led me to want to push myself, and in ways that I never would have. And because of that, I've accomplished things that I never would have even dreamed of before, because I'm like, oh, I can handle this. I can do these things. I tell myself and my son all the time, we can do hard things. And if I had never gone through all those things, I probably would be living a very safe life, which there's nothing wrong with that. But now I get to live in like such a pride and such a boost of not only for myself, but teaching my son, but also just like all the people that I work with. Because I'm like, you are capable of so many things, and that has elevated my life in so many ways that I never would have been able to before.
Congratulations on that marathon, and well done at finding your passion in life. And as you say, even though we may consider our false starts, so to speak, to be mistakes, it can lead us to realize facts about ourselves and preferences that we wouldn't have otherwise realized. So there is much virtue in taking events that we might consider undesirable or erroneous and learning from them. We can make the best of the situation, even though the situation itself we may have preferred to have reached our current destination more quickly without the shortcomings or without the false starts. We would all prefer that sort of efficiency, but at least when something does happen that's undesirable, we can at least learn from it. So we can make the best of the situation. That's an important skill to have in life, to learn as much as possible from as many different opportunities as possible. What I'd like to explore in great depth today is the different ways that we conceptualize being broken and what values we attach to it, because there seem to be a large number of different embodiments of different values, even if people don't articulate them this way, which is, in my perspective, very much a problem in our society, that we don't very much articulate what we believe. We simply believe implicitly. We believe based on assumptions, but we don't introspect enough and actually understand why it is that we're believing these ideas. But there seem to be a few different embodiments of philosophies that people have regarding problems. I'd say there are three major ones. The first major perspective or philosophy would be to stigmatize the problems themselves, and to say that these things are bad, and to place a moral judgment on the people experiencing them. This is something that we often see, for example, when people in the media personalities, make a joke out of mental illness, which unfortunately I still do see in certain circles. We still see that, and it's completely abhorrent, but unfortunately people still do that. People attach a moral label to people who are experiencing mental illness and say this person is weak, or this is an excuse to be weak. So they're stigmatizing the problems themselves, or even situations where people might be quite troubled and not doing what's in their best interests, but ultimately the moral judgment is not warranted. People place a moral judgment on that. So that's the stigma. Then we have what we could call reactions to that kind of stigma, and we have attempts to destigmatize. Some people say we shouldn't call things problems at all because the word problem is stigmatizing, and this is again something that's quite prominent in my work as a therapist and in the mental health space, is that we're discouraged from using terms sometimes like problems, because we say when you say words like problems, people have negative associations with them, and that it activates ideas in their mind that are actually discouraging and counteractive to their progress. There has been evidence that you can activate ideas in minds that influence how people act based on language. That is certainly a true phenomenon, although it's far more complicated than what can be achieved through using one word in a whole context of different words and different gestures. Then there's the third perspective, which is to admit to being broken and treating it as a superpower. When we stigmatize problems, we are placing, quite often, more often than not, we are placing unfair moral judgment on the individuals involved. We cannot be expected to be perfect, and to place those moral judgments is not only cruel most of the time, but it also perpetuates an attitude that prevents those people from actually getting help and changing. So it's counterproductive on a large number of different levels, as well as being reflective of some rather problematic tendencies that we have as a society. The problem with the second perspective, never say that we have problems, or to effectively try to introduce a sense of false positivity to all problems, is that it's an example of what we call avoidance. Avoidance simply means to not engage with something when it makes us uncomfortable on the basis that it makes us uncomfortable. We tend to treat discomfort as a threat and avoid engaging with it, but what that often results in is problems remaining unsolved, because instead of us facing the discomfort of the problems and finding ways to solve them in ways that are practical and appropriate for us, avoiding them allows them to perpetuate. And again, that is very much a problematic tendency. It can have moral issues involved, but at a basic logistical level, problems do remain unsolved. And all too often, we are very quick to reframe and create a false narrative about problems not actually being problems, because we're too scared to admit they're problems, and we're too scared of reviving the stigma associated with those problems. Then there's the perspective you've introduced, which addresses a lot of these problems. You can admit to being broken while treating it as a superpower. Now, I certainly think that we should make the most of every situation and learn as much as we can from it. I'm wondering, though, if the term superpower invokes an idea into people's minds that the problems are less severe or less warranting of their attention than they could be. There's a particular example of this which I won't dive too deeply into it because it's largely the domain of another discussion, but there's a lot of division in the autistic community about how to label autism. And some people say your autism is a superpower, and other people will counter that and say it's not a superpower, it's actually quite disabling. And these two perspectives will very much fight with each other. I'm wondering if using the term superpower, in a manner of speaking, can be a form of dismissal in some way. It sort of leads people away from admitting that they have a problem and instead trying to reframe it because they're too scared to face the reality that they have a problem. What's your perspective on that possibility?
I definitely can see how that could be interpreted as far as, but as you get into my coaching program, you start to see what I actually do is I face on the problem part of it head on. And but what I also have to be very sensitive to is that somebody who's coming in from is feeling very broken, what I really need to do is to get them to shift their mindset just enough. And then I introduce the 1% principle. And like I had crippling anxiety at one point. So there are parts of my trauma and parts of my past that I can reflect back on and use them as a superpower. But it took some work for me to get there. I didn't just get there by ignoring those problems. If anything, my therapist would say that I am more committed than most of her. She said that I'm more committed than most of the people that just in making sure that I change my circumstance so that I am working towards the life that I want to live. And so when I say that my past is my superpower, that my brokenness is my superpower, what I'm talking about is I have been able to take what does serve me and use that and work on what doesn't serve me and use that energy that I'm getting from to change my current situation. So like with my anxiety, there was a point where I was having an anxiety attack almost every day. It's not serving me, it's not serving me in any way to the life that I wanted to live. But if I wasn't even willing to make progress because I just thought, well, I'm broken anyway, so why even try? And so that's why I use that word superpower, because I want people to see, like, you can actually shift this into the life that you want to live. And so if my anxiety, and it's going to be different for every person in their journey, whatever it is that's holding them back or that's making them sit back a little bit because they just think it's not worth giving it a go, that's where I say it is worth giving it a go, because you have the potential to live the dream that you want to live the life you want to live. But it does come with work, and I'm very transparent about that on my website. I know there's a lot of quick fixes out there, and it's a lot of, and how I am with my coaching, but my other part of it is that it's not overwhelming, because we are only doing 1% at a time. Right now we are focusing on, in the very beginning of the journey, it's about just addressing what is it that you feel like is holding you back. And I use the word expectations to the three categories the expectations that we put on ourselves, the expectations that others put on us, and the expectation that the society puts on us. And we all react differently to those things. And one of those typically is driving our behavior. And so to address which expectation is it that is holding you back, and kind of navigate a little bit, why is that what's holding you back? Are you putting more weight on that than is needed? If you are, then is that serving you in the way that you want to live? And where I have to be really careful is that anybody who feels broken feels incredibly overwhelmed. It feels to try to do anything different. And so it's that first part of the journey is, just assessing that maybe this thing that you don't like about yourself or that isn't your favorite thing could actually turn into something that could be really powerfully used to help you. And so with my anxiety, how I help some of my clients is addressing it and then going, how can I break this down into small, minute pieces to actually make a difference in my life? How can I make it so that my anxiety isn't overwhelming? It was a 4-year journey for me to go from anxiety attacks every day, nearly, to now I have them maybe twice a year, and they used to cause me weeks of turmoil. Now I reset in 10 to 15 minutes usually. I go through a cognitive checklist, and where it gets to me, where I have found the differences is that a lot of the things that I was told would work did not work for me. And so the expectation that I had of, well, you should do this because this will work, this worked for me. And that's again another expectation. Even like in the therapy community, it's, well, I have these 5 tactics that you should try. And I would try all 5 of them, and none of them really felt like they would work for me. And so again, it added to that feeling of being broken. And I was like, okay, I think, But where I think that I've been able to kind of unhinge some of the things is that I've been very persistent. And I say I'm like the most persistent, unpersistent person ever. Because I'll try something and I'll be like, and I'll get kind of like, that didn't work, And then a week later, I'll be like, I didn't try the second thing, so I'll try that. And that doesn't work. And then a month will go by and then I'll be like, I never tried that third thing. And I think that the concept of the 1% is what has been able to shift me to that, because if I'm only focusing on 1% at a time, then it's not as overwhelming. And it's just like, okay, well, I'm just trying this. But what I went from how I use the visual for me and to describe to my clients is, when I first started this journey, it was about building bricks. I had built bricks my whole life into a path that was dark and dingy and gross, and at the end there was like this pool that was just dead. There was nothing there that served me, that helped me, whatever. So how was I going to get from there to something that actually was going to serve me? And to me, that's where I use that 1%. Is like, I took one brick, one concept, and I tried 20 of them, and if you would think about it, 19 of them failed, but one of them worked. So that means I got one brick towards the light path that I wanted to be. And so to what you're saying is, I can see how it be seen as like dismissive of it, but it's really just like trying to get people to shift their mindset. And then how do we get to where we want to be? Because every one of us has things that drive us. Every one of us wants to be put into what makes us feel good and what serves us. And so to me, that's where everything goes back to. It's just, how do we serve ourselves? How do we build tools that work for ourselves, because all of us are individual? And how do we leave with perspective that matters to us? And so when we have like you brought up the autistic community, and how, one perception is like that being autistic is a superpower, and the other one looks at it as like, well, you're not acknowledging. But it's like, being autistic is a superpower, but there are things that maybe are challenges, just like every single one of us. So what are the challenges that we can take, and how can we add 1% towards that to make us, to help serve us better? And I think that goes back to the individual. Every single one of us is different, and what we need to fulfill our lives is what we work towards.
First of all, I very much empathise with the matter of anxiety, and congratulations on that change. I know how difficult it is to make that type of development in one's life. I very much respect your ethos and your perspective, in that there's emphasis in your programs on personal action and being persistent in finding different solutions. Even if a large number of them don't work, eventually one is likely to find one that does. Taking personal responsibility, working on one's own circumstances, those are very much critical components of the change process, regardless of the type of approach which we practice in our helping work. As a counsellor, I receive referrals from others, and I also like to help my audience become aware of resources and other providers which may be beneficial, as well as help other individuals and organisations gain exposure. That's why I host the Your Listener Partner Network, and I'd like to thank my partners for their support. I'd like to introduce Art of Caring. Art of Caring offers compassionate counselling that is person-centred, neuro-affirming, LGBTQIA+ inclusive, trauma-aware and client-led for children, teens and adults on the Gold Coast in Australia. Run by Deborah Both, an ACA-registered counsellor with lived experience as a late-diagnosed ADHD adult and parent of neurodivergent young adults, Art of Caring provides a genuinely understanding space for neurodivergent individuals, parents and families navigating life's complexities. Services include individual counselling, Lego-based therapy groups, and creative group programs including art and craft sessions at Healing Hooves Incorporated in Nerang. Deborah is available in person at Healing Hooves Incorporated and online. Private clients as well as NDIS self-managed and plan-managed participants are welcome. Contact Deborah at www.artofcaring.com.au. What I want to ponder is a potential perspective or a reframing of having problems. And it's, I can have problems and acknowledge that they're problems without me being a bad person, or with being able to separate the idea of having problems with the level of worth that I have as a person, or the level of effort that I'm willing to expend in living the best life that I can. it seems to be difficult for people to separate the reality of a problem situation from how much effort they're willing to put in and how much they value themselves as a person. And by that I mean, all too often therapeutic approaches focus on trying to reframe problems, which has a value to a large extent, because often changing perspective on a problem is the most practical way to solve it. But all too often, as I said before, one of our greatest fears and one of our greatest causes for avoidance is internal discomfort. And when we acknowledge that we have problems, all too often it's so confronting to us that we want to just avoid them. And all too often we do self-pacify, and we find ways to effectively distract ourselves from the problems of life in order to live. In fact, I've actually argued that one of the key driving forces of human behavior and human and societal functioning is the idea that we all implicitly know that life is dangerous and that death is imminent and that life is going to be fraught with problems, and that our minds unconsciously know it. And if it was to actually be in our conscious all the time, we would be so anxious that we wouldn't be able to live life. And that's why we have so many self-pacifying strategies like consumerism and drugs, video games, things that are of addiction to us, things that distract us and that don't involve a lot of mental effort. Not to stigmatize it, but simply to say that often this is our way of our minds distracting us, because we implicitly believe if we distract ourselves from the anxieties of life, then we'll be able to live more effectively, or we'll be able to concentrate more on things. I would argue, as it may seem naive, it may seem unrealistic, but I think it's certainly worth pondering that one of the greatest virtues is to be able to acknowledge that you have a problem without thinking less of yourself and without avoiding it. And being able to wake up in the morning and say, I acknowledge that life is dangerous and that there are dangers out there and that there are no guarantees, and bad things can happen to any one of us. But it's not going to stop me trying my best to make every day the best day that it can be. It's not going to stop me striving for perfection and at least trying to make myself the best that I can be. It's not going to stop me from loving myself and being willing to acknowledge that although I'm a flawed human, I don't have to hate myself. I'm worth loving. I'm worth the self-love. It also doesn't have to force me to treat everything as a problem or as a threat. I can see the good as well as the bad. I think that type of balance and being able to hold both what I might call painfully intense awareness of danger with also self-compassion, love, and determination to make the best of every day, I think that's a good ideal. I think it's actually one of the most virtuous ideals. I think that a mind that can do that is quite a strong mind, and I think that more of us are capable of developing that mindset than we actually give ourselves credit for. I think we're a lot stronger than we think we are. Unfortunately, a lot of society's teachings in combination with our own choices can whittle that, but I think it's a more accessible mindset than people think it is. And I think with practice, we could strengthen our minds and we could actually this is not about being more subservient to society, but more compassionate and attentive to ourselves, and being able to be more independent problem solvers and being able to live better lives for ourselves and for the people around us as a result of being able to be at ease with the idea that danger exists, being able to acknowledge it, but without letting it drive our life.
I definitely want to add to that, because I can say that while I'm there now, when I very first started my journey, I was not there. I did not have self-love. I did not have appreciation for any of the superpowers that I know I have now. There was no part of me that thought that I was of value. I had been in a long-term relationship that was really taxing on my personal sense of self, and just consistently told that I was unvaluable. And it was to the point where I really did feel as if I was worth nothing. And I mean, when I left that situation, the way that I describe that in my head is that a skeleton walking out of that situation with just nothing but the teeniest little flame inside of my chest. But there was no point in which I was like, oh, I have value, or I can help others, or And so I worked from that 1%. And at the time, I didn't know it was the 1%. At the time, I just wanted to do something better for my son. And so that's where I say where we all drive motivation from different aspects. Some of us do have it within ourselves. Others do it for others. And for me, my son, it was my guiding light. It was kind of, well, I want him to learn to navigate life better than I'm doing right now. I want him to be stronger because, and a lot of the concepts that I worked on earlier on was in basis of him because I couldn't see it for myself. And such a turning point was I had a really hard time with the word worthy because I was just like, me? Worthy? Not really, but I was like, I don't really like that word anyway. And I was like, what does worthy mean to me when what are any of us worthy of? Because, you know, there's somebody that's starving. So I have life better than them. The concept that was brought back to me is, are you worthy of love? And I said, well, who's really worthy of love? Like, that's just a concept that we all put in our minds, right? Put in the perspective of, is your son worthy of love? And my immediate answer is absolutely. Like, that doesn't even, it was such a contrast. And so when we're doing our journey to find ourselves and be the version of who we are now, because who we were at the beginning of it is very different than who we are now in the present moment. And so we have to find what's serving us. And in those moments, I had nothing in my repertoire that was about self-worth. And so I did have to lean on what is my little guiding light. And I think there's a lot of hyperbole on finding your passion and finding what makes you drive. But it's just like, what is something that just makes you want to try just a little bit? And for me, it was him. Some of my clients that I work for, it's for their family members. Some of them, it's for themselves. Some of them, it's from an idea. I have one client that really wants to be an inspiration to young women. She's in the business world, and she just sees so many people are struggling, or so many young girls are struggling to find their place because there's not a lot of example of it. And so that's her driving factor. And we all have something that motivates us. And so when we go back to, I just want to kind of put into the listener's mind that you can start this whole thing and not have those things. And with those little bricks, I now have so much self-worth, so much self-love, so much confidence in who I am, and so much confidence in my clients and their abilities and how we are able to shift ourselves. And there was a point in my life where I couldn't hardly get up from my bed for days at a time. And I think it's really important to paint that narrative because there's just this perception out there that, oh, just get up by the bootstraps and do it. But I didn't have the energy, I didn't have the drive, I didn't have anything. But with just a little piece at a time, I was able to get there. And I think that it can kind of feel overwhelming, just like, oh, well, where do I even start? And you just start with the thing that's closest to you. And then the next little thing. And it's keeping it as small and simple as possible. Sometimes my 1% for the week is that I'm not drinking enough water, which is making me a little bit cranky. So now my goal for the week is to put a water by my bedside so that when I wake up, and if I don't do it, that's the other part that becomes really important in all of this, is when you say that we have to have forgiveness and love for ourselves, self-love, and understanding that we are going to mess up. So there's this whole idea of like, oh, even training for a marathon. It's like, I got to run X amount of miles a week and then I'll be ready. But I'll be honest, my marathon training was all over the map. I was sick some weeks. But you know what? I still did it. I still got there. There were some weeks that I couldn't run at all. I hurt my foot. The trials and tribulations are going to come our way. And then if we are able to sit there and just forgive, and go into it knowing that I'm probably not going to be the most amazing at this, and I'm probably going to mess up a lot. And there's that idea that, oh, okay, well, I didn't put the water by my bedside tonight, but that doesn't mean I failed. It just means well, I did it one day out of this week that was better than I did last week, which is 0 days. And then next week it's like, well, I got 2. That's how simple that 1% can really be. And I think it's really important for people to understand that no matter where you are at in your journey, that you can start from anywhere and still lead to the life that you really want, even if it feels incredibly impossible. I promise it's like totally able to do.
You're very much an excellent example, Tabitha, of what can be accomplished with that type of effort and devotion. And I hope our listeners who are in a place in which they may feel that change is impossible, I sincerely hope that that's an inspiration to you. Before we finish, Tabitha, I want to take a slight divergence for a moment and ask you about how you position yourself within your industry, because you made an important point earlier. You mentioned that there are no quick fixes, even though some people advertise them. And I've been very vocal about my concerns about the helping industry, not just in therapy, the therapy industry in Australia and in the world in general, but also the coaching industry, and how there are a lot of dishonest practitioners and a lot of unethical marketing that goes on, and businesses trying to get you more clients and all types of things that are just not acceptable in the realms of the spirit of a helping professional. I'm wondering, how do you navigate and position yourself alongside these providers that are promising far more than what they can actually achieve, or at the very least are promising more than that is actually reasonable to promise? You being a more modest individual who's more realistic about what you can actually achieve with your clients, people often buy what they want to hear, not what they necessarily need to hear. And it sounds that what you offer is something far more practical and also more on the side of what people actually need to hear rather than what they want to hear. I'm wondering, how do you position yourself in this industry, and what have you seen that relates to that?
I position myself in living by example, and I think that that's something that really stands out from maybe some of the other situations, is that I literally have walked the path every step of the way. I went from rock bottom to I am thriving now. And that's another part of that I did want to quickly bring up, is that a lot of time people are like, oh, you're so much better now, you're all better now. And I tell them, no, like I am always still doing my 1%, because yes, I'm better than I was, 5 years ago, but I still have things that I want to drive towards, to be for, and to put on that expectation of like, oh, well, you're all better now, like you don't need help or whatever. And it's like, no, I still use my tools every day. I still, if I'm feeling a little bit sad, I know to call a friend, because that's a tool that works for me. And so how I position myself differently is because I was that client. I was the one that was going, this isn't working. That, like, every time I bought those packages, because I've tried those 19 things, and out of the 19 things, they were all quick fixes. And I will say that I had an amazing therapist, and who did keep me very consistent. But I also didn't just lean on my therapist. I went out and found things on my own, because there were things that she suggested that didn't feel like me. And there were things that I went to a meetup group, and funny enough, I hated every bit of it. And I walked into it thinking that I would love it. But what I did learn is that I don't love that. So I tried something new. And so how I position myself a little bit differently is I've been there, I've walked the walk, and so I know that this isn't easy, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, because I actually want you to be able to make those changes in your life. And I want to give you a sustainable way to do it, because even the quick fixes, a lot of times it's like, go through this course for 2 hours. Well, I didn't have the energy in the beginning of my journey to do a course for 2 hours. I had maybe the energy to listen to something for 10 minutes. I had maybe the energy to have a thought, because in the beginning of the journey is where it really starts to, like, that's where you're making those mental changes. And I think a lot of times externally, we want to try to fix it all. My example is like when our house feels messy. Well, some of us will have this like surge of energy, and we'll try to clean the entire house. But at what cost did that come with? That came with, now I have 0 energy again. now I have zero ability to do it. And I feel like that's what a lot of the coaching programs are, is like, yes, it got the house clean, but the cost was far outweighing that. Whereas my strategy with the 1% is I'm just going to focus on like a couple of loads of laundry and then go for a walk. Because now I'm serving two things. I'm getting the house a little bit cleaner, but I'm also serving the need that I have to make myself strong enough so I can get to the next step, which the next step would be to dust. But if I'm not strong enough to do that, I've overwhelmed myself so much. And so that's how I position myself in a lot of the, against, I guess, some of the normal way of going about with the fancy taglines. And I think it's hard for people. I also, in the coaching programs, I think it is hard for them not to position themselves that way, because it is difficult to get clients to want to sign up into something that is difficult, to want to sign up for something that is consistent and regular, because a lot of people do want a quick fix. And it takes somebody who's saying, I tried 19 of those things and that's not working. But that long hour walk that I went on, that did work. So I think it just turned into, it's hard because you want to grab their attention and you want to help people. I have no qualms with people in the coaching trying to get people to understand what they do in a quick format. But I think sometimes it just falls short into the expectations of somebody who's really desperately looking for a change, who really wants something different. And that's where I was. I was like, I want this to be different. Why is it not working? Am I more broken because I can't do this thing that everybody else seems to be able to do? They have all these success stories. I'm clearly not one of them. I must be broken again, And so I just try to put out there, and I've always been this way in my entire life. It just, I want you to have the full story from the get-go. It's not going to be easy, but I'll be here for you in and out. I will be consistent with how I tell you what works and what doesn't work. And when I say that, it's different for everybody. So when I tell you those things that work, I also will share, it may work for you, it may not. If it doesn't, what was something that you didn't like about it? Because even in the things that we try and that didn't work, I used to get so deflated. And it's like, well, actually, but now I just learned that is actually something that I thought I liked and I really don't like. So that's success in itself. That's a 1%.
And among the hyperbole of the self-help industry, Tabitha, I think you're an excellent example of what does work and the type of dedication that people really need. So I hope people are taking note of this, and you're an excellent inspiration, and I'd really enjoyed discussing these concepts with you. I'd like to say thank you so much for joining me on the program today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to have all your listeners get to understand the concept of Be Broken and Beautiful, that being broken can work for you.
And likewise, and to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have concerns for yourself or somebody else, please seek the advice of a professional or somebody else that you trust. My contact details will be in the description of this episode for any people in Australia seeking counselling from me. Tabitha's contact details and links will be in the description of this episode as well for those seeking to contact her. If you have any feedback on the program, if you'd like to be a guest or if you'd like to make a suggestion or otherwise, please feel free to contact me. I always love to hear from my audience. And until next time, everybody, take care.